My name is Linda Kaiser, and welcome to The Circle. My guests today are my co-host, of course, Morgan Rhodes, and Shelley Evans, and Mary Beth Ward, and Catherine Harris. And the topic of our show today is bees. And bees are in crisis, and they need our help. The bees are dying at an alarming rate. And the reason for that is a bunch of pesticides unleashed by the agrochemical giants like Bayer, Monsanto, and Syngenta. While the government concedes that these chemicals are highly toxic to the bees, it's done virtually nothing to rein in the pesticide free-for-all that we're experiencing. We can't afford to lose bees, not when 1 out of every 3 bites of food we take depend on the bees. So I'm sure you've seen the headlines. 42% of the nation's honeybee colonies collapsed over the past year. Morgan is going to tell us a little bit more about the situation.
Well, let's first talk about how we got here. So we've been farming for about 10,000 years as humans, but the model of industrial agriculture really showed up about 60 years ago. So post-World War II, we started changing our farming practices. The first thing that we did is we stopped planting cover crops like alfalfa hay and clover, which fix nitrogen in the soil and act as a natural fertilizer, and we replaced them with synthetic fertilizers. And the second thing we did is we started growing larger and larger crop monocultures. So as in, the areas that used to have very diverse flora are now dominated by 1 or 2 major crops such as soybeans or corn. And this industrial agricultural system in the model really introduced chemical products and fertilizers, not just in our farming and our agriculture, but it's seeping into every facet of modern life. You can see this in residue on our produce, you see it in increased chronic disease, you see it in loss of biodiversity. And this means the changing in farming practices means we have systematically been eliminating many of the plants that bees need for survival. There's been a worldwide increase of 300% over the past couple of years in crop production that needs bees. As Linda said, 1 every 3 bites of food we take, bees need to pollinate. And the last fact, over half of our pollinators are at risk of extinction. So it's important that we understand the relationship we have with bees as humans and the way that affects our wellness and our condition of life. The bad news is that this is in every area of our lives. The bad news is the EPA, they approved neonicotinoids or neonics without a sufficient review. And these are insecticides that are chemically related to nicotine that insects literally drop dead because of these. The good news is that a lot of the reason why bees population is declining is due to reversible human actions. We really need to get back down to what's natural, what's simple, what's real, the good stuff. And speaking of the good stuff, honey, bees do more than just one thing for us. Honey is really the only food that includes all substances necessary for life. It has enzymes and vitamins and minerals, and its medicinal properties are just astounding. So I think Shelley can say a little bit about that.
Well, we know that honey has been recorded all the way back to the ancient Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians for all the many purposes, medicinal in particular. And it was not until 2006 that Manuka honey was revealed. Now, Manuka honey is even more potent in its antibacterial properties. It's measured by what is called methylglyoxal, that's an MgO. These properties are hundreds of times more potent than just your regular honey. So when spread on wounds, the honey can actually stop bacteria from attaching to tissues. And I know my grandmother always promoted us using honey on every wound for every injury, whether it was colds or somebody wiped out in the barbed wire fence. Honey was always the go-to remedy. So what makes that property? The certain and very specific flowers and the pollen that's used. So Melaleuca alternifolia, but also the Manuka plant itself. And the reason it's so wonderful is really because it does also two really useful services, where it's a land reclamation, because Manuka grows in very steep terrains that can't be used for farming. and also its availability for where the erosion has taken proper use of farming away. So really we're able to introduce Manuka and benefit the entire planet. And so one of the things to be considered would be how the bees are doing that and how the bees are following their lines of magnetic travel, is because they have these magnetite crystals that are in their abdomen. And so that takes us into not just the pollutants that are harming the bees, but also the electromagnetic pollutions that are affecting the travel of the bees. So when it comes to frequency and vibration and how bees, among some of our other animals, travel, Catherine had some interesting information with regard to that.
Yeah, well, it's not so much about how they travel, although I think your point about which flowers are the bees using is really important, and I just wanted to offer to our viewers that if you are a person that suffers from seasonal allergies, the recommendation that I've heard is to eat organic honey from your area, because the bees have already processed those flowers for you. And so that's going to help your immunity with allergies. But I think it's fascinating that they have this magnetic property in their abdomens, because that is also the organ from which they produce their wax. Just like a spider spins a web, that's where they get their wax. And this wax is an amazing substance. They use it to build these honeycombs where they store the honey, and they cover over the honeycomb with this wax, which has about 300 different chemical components to it. They store their food, their nectar, and their pollen, and they even house their young using this wax, which removes toxins from the honey. Now, what I found out I thought was so interesting is that the wax vibrates, and it also changes temperature. It has a resonant frequency that has been identified as between 230 to 270 hertz. And this is matched to vibration sensors on the bees. And so they actually use the comb as a email device. They communicate to each other on the other side of the comb by managing the temperature of the rims of the honeycomb cells. And this is how they speak to each other. The wax actually holds memory and history for them by the chemical signals that they put into it. So the reason that I got looking at this is because there's a new device out there called the Flow Hive, which is a different sort of beehive, and it's been kind of touted as a great convenience and that it's good for the bees, because instead of the beekeepers having to lift out the trays in which, the honeycomb is stored, and there's always a few bee deaths that occur when they do that, this hive is designed with plastic tubing that just brings the honey straight out of the hive into your container. But some beekeepers have really spoken against this, because basically the honeycomb gets replaced with a plastic comb, and this is not necessarily going to work out very well for the bees who need that honeycomb and that wax for all these different functions that they use. So unfortunately, I myself thought, this is going to make it much easier for civilians to keep bees without having the hazmat suit and all that. But
It's done.
yeah, but I have heard of beekeepers who don't need protection from their bees. They have enough harmony with the bees and enough communication with them to harvest the honey without those kinds of safeguards. And I just want to encourage everybody to really welcome the bees into the yard when you see them, and speak sweet words to them, because we really need them.
So Mary Beth, do you know how much honey a bee produces?
Yeah, unbelievably, one bee in its lifetime produces only 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey, which means 12 bees are needed for every teaspoon of honey that we consume. You know, that to me was amazing, and the fact that the bees' lifespan is just 1 year. They are really incredible workers, and they do so much for us. And I think that it's really important that we honor this part of creation. Without them, we would lose, you know, close to a third of our food supply. We'd lose a lot of vitamins that we need, a lot of nutrients that we need, and fortunately, there are things that we can do just as average, everyday citizens. The first thing is really stop using pesticides on your gardens and your lawns. It's such an easy thing to do. We all live in a society where we think we have to have the beautiful green manicured yards, but we're paying a huge price for that. So I think it's time that everybody just goes back to the lawns that we had when we were kids, with beautiful dandelions and clover and all of the things that are going to keep our bees alive. So that's number one. The other thing is, if you are having an outside garden in your yard, plant organic. Use the heirloom seeds. Try to just be as clean as you can with your garden. Plant lots of flowers that attract the bees. Red clover and bee balm are really great, but all the beautiful flowers, you know, just have a lovely cutting garden out there, and keep the bees happy. And support your local beekeepers. It's really important that we keep these backyard beekeepers going. And it's also very important that you have the honey, like Catherine said, from our own area. So support your beekeepers, and you know, also try to buy as much organic fruits and vegetables as you can. The more we stay away from the genetically modified seeds and foods, the quicker we're going to solve the problem of the, you know, plight of the bees. And the other great news is that there's actually legislation in different states around the country supporting the Pollinator Protection Act. And more people are becoming aware of this. They're contacting their local government, their senators, and there is a lot of legislation that's on the floor of different states right now. Maryland actually passed a law, which is fantastic, protecting the bees and controlling the chemicals that are used. So that's amazing. And one other fact that I was surprised is North Dakota is the #1 honey producer in the United States. They produce more than 42 million pounds of honey, valued at more than $48 million. So it's you know, it's cash for our economy. So just honor our bees, and when you see them, be kind to them. We definitely do need them.
And you know what else I was looking at? I found a little list of what are bee-friendly plants. Almonds are very bee-friendly, and apple trees are really good bee attractors, as are blueberries. And the United States of America is the world's largest producer of blueberries, and I had no idea about that. We harvested 132 tons of cultivated and wild blueberries last year. Isn't that fascinating? Mm-hmm. That blew my mind, because I love blueberries.
Yeah.
Cucumbers. Bees love cucumbers. Bees love onions. Bees love pumpkins. And bees love strawberries. That's their big thing. A fully developed strawberry needs about 21 visits from bees. And a single strawberry can have 400 to 500 seeds sitting on the surface of one berry. The higher the number of fully developed seeds, the bigger, tastier, and even shaped a strawberry gets. So think about it. If we didn't have bees, we wouldn't have strawberries, you guys. That would be really horrible. It would be horrible. And another thing that I discovered was that tillage practices that create special soil cover conditions influence pollinator abundance in general. Pumpkin pollinators are ground nesting bees, which I didn't know. The female bee collects the pollen and the nectar from the flowers like a squash or a pumpkin, and they're active in the morning. So every vegetable has a different way of interacting with the bees, and they visit the onion flowers to collect the nectar and the pollen, but only the nectar foragers visit both the male sterile and the male fertile lines in a hybrid onion production. And usually bees don't find onions very attractive, but certain bees really like onions. So these facts are just, they're so interesting. And one other thing that Shelley mentioned when we were discussing this was artwork. Do you remember that?
Well, bees have been inspiring people, like I said earlier, all the way back to ancient Sumerian times. I mean, just the value of honeybee pollination to the U.S. agriculture alone is over 14 billion annually. That's just the pollination science. So when we start talking science, and in other ways that we have been inspired, there's even batteries that are now being investigated to use pollen as their source of energy. And so that's pretty cool. But we have the basic art where there have been people that have taken sculptures and created the hive around them. And then there was one fellow in particular who was really ingenious. He had it set up so that the activity of the bees activated LED lights, so that they were creating this light show. And then further to that, he had it set up so that it was activating these musical instruments. So the activity of the bee, of all the bees, were creating this beautiful light and sound show. But bees create 10 of our most important substances known to man. I mean, art is wonderful, but we have honey, the royal jelly, the bee sting itself, just for the medicinal properties in homeopathy, and in all the research and other wisdoms that every industry on the planet has been inspired by.
You know, one of the things that rather disturbed me was in this little research that I did. It seems that now that the honeybee genome has been sequenced, how long before we bear witness to a genetically modified bee?
Well, it's already in progress. We even have robotic bees.
Right. So now if Monsanto can make the insecticides that kill all the bees, along with Syngenta and Bayer, then now they can create a bee that's resistant to all the stuff that they sell. And then they persuade the beekeeper to buy a Monsanto bee. That's called wicked genius, right? That's pretty bad.
That's a cranky bee.
Suicide.
I find it amazing too, because the chemical companies are saying that it is not the pesticides that are causing the colony collapse disorder. However, when you look at Cuba, who has never used any of these pesticides or fungicides, their bee population is so healthy and has never, ever suffered any of the colony collapse disorder that's been happening in other parts of the world. So there's definitely a correlation between the pesticides and the health of the bees.
And in the U.S., the EPA doesn't count seed coating as part of the chemical treatment. So they're, basically washing crops like corn in chemicals. So before you even put the seed in the ground, you're already putting chemicals on it. And then, like I said, we got to get back to what's natural. And a woman named Marla Spivak, she's a bee researcher and a biology researcher. She stated on her TED Talk a couple of years ago that every batch of pollen that one little tiny 1-inch bee carries has 6 pesticides in it. So, I mean, she also said that, bees are holding up a really large mirror to us as humans in the direction that we're moving in the condition of our livelihood. And if you think that if one little 1-inch bee is carrying 6 pesticides in its body, then how many pesticides are surging through, or even just chemical synthetic products are surging through our human bodies? I mean, and then 90% of the chemicals and the pesticides we use end up seeping into our soil and our groundwater, and where they persist for up to 10 years. And we got to start thinking ahead, generationally, and we got to start thinking about building what endures, and, building bees that are fake, and, moving into more synthetic stuff. Like the environment shares information. Organisms share information with each other on the cellular level. And so when you begin changing things in that kind of makeup and getting that kind of information spread, I mean, we're not building what endures. And Shelley brought up something about, what happens with bees. It does affect them generationally. I thought that was really interesting.
Yes, that's transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. What that means is if the bees have been stressed last year, the next 7 generations of bees are going to be carrying this stress forward. However, there's also modifications, and the research is showing that the bees adapt. And so, not to say we don't need to be cautious, but what the research is showing is that they are actually transcending those types of stresses. And I hope that that's a very encouraging note for us to also say that it has been noted that some of the colonies are bouncing back, and like Mary Beth was saying, some of them haven't even been affected. However, really, due diligence, we know how serious this is. We need to take every step in our own personal experience, in our own personal day-to-day life.
Well, I have a
really think of what endures.
I have a jaw dropper for you. In the past 2 decades, Monsanto's seed monopoly has grown so powerful that they control the genetics of nearly 90% of 5 major commodity crops, including corn, soybeans, cotton, canola, and sugar beets. And they make gobs of cash, and yet they sue the farmers both in the United States and in struggling international communities. Between 1997 and 2010, Monsanto admits to filing 144 lawsuits against Americans' farmers, while settling another 700 lawsuits out of court. And what they've done is create an atmosphere of fear in rural America, and they drive dozens of farmers into bankruptcy. So it's a bad business model to create something that can't be controlled except by suing the you-know-what out of people. And not only that, in India, thousands of farmers have committed suicide by drinking insecticide, no less, because they were promised harvest and income only to have the crops fail and the debts surmount their ability to pay, thanks to the newly planted, modified seeds. So I don't really think that Monsanto's been investing in bee health, and I don't think we need fake bees. I don't think that's the right solution.
Isn't that just so convenient of them to invent a Frankenbee that can resist the poisons that they are putting into our plants? That's really so helpful. I wanted to tell you guys though about there is a increasing awareness about this. I don't know if you heard that Morgan Freeman, the actor, who's one of my favorites. I'll watch anything with him in it. And he owns a little blues club down in Clarksville, Mississippi. But he has converted his 124-acre ranch into a bee sanctuary. And he's not even harvesting the honey. He's just he's planting all the stuff that the bees love. So he's got acres and acres of clover, lavender, magnolia trees with big blossoms. So this is all just a gift to the bees to help them be happy and healthy. It's lovely.
That is awesome, Catherine. I want to mention one thing. There is a mycologist named Paul Stamets, and he has revealed a breakthrough discovery that has the potential to change and heal the ecosystem. He proposes that there is a missing link that can dramatically influence bee health, and it's right under our feet. It's called mycelium. And he did a speech, and he has a website. His name is Paul Stamets. It's Stamets. And on his website, he takes this journey of discovery beginning in 1984, when he first noticed the bees from his hives flying from sunrise to sunset for more than 40 days to a patch of mycelium that he planted in his garden. So a gentleman said, "Can you help the bees?" And he remembered this very strange occurrence, and that reignited his interest in the bees. So now he's got a whole system to help colony collapse disorder. So I think that we'll put his website information underneath the show. But before we close, I want to mention another thing that I found, and that's a group called Pesticide Action Network North America. And what they have done that's so beautiful is give you sample letters to the editor to write, and they teach you how to go about helping in the community. So in other words, to lead a discussion at your local library, find books about bees, find books about pollination, have a little dinner, a potluck dinner at your house, and discuss the bees. Organize the creative actions, like put a sign up in the grocery store. Say, "Come to a potluck dinner at my house and let's have a bee discussion." But particularly write op-ed letters to the editor, and they even tell you how to do it. Keep it short, keep it simple, and here's a sample. So for those of you who really want to take action and don't quite know how, www.panna.org. And we shall put that on our website. And with that, Morgan, would you like to close our show, please?
Would love to. I'm going to talk about one more good thing that's happening, just because, you know, we were talking about what bees love, and they love wildflowers, and those are kind of, you know, much of the native wildflower landscape has been lost due to our, you know, building developments and our farming practices. And so anyway, Leah Michelle and Burt's Bees have a Bring Back the Bee campaign, which I thought was kind of cool. You know, you have a movie star and a, makeup, you know, cosmetic, you know, body care company getting involved, and their goal is to plant 1 billion wildflowers for the bees, and to begin building a nourishing habitat for our bees and just raise awareness. And planting these wildflowers isn't going to upset the balance of nature, and it's really going to help, you know, bees and butterflies and other, you know, creatures that are going extinct. But yeah, what can you do? What can you do from the comfort of your home? Like Linda was saying, go on Pesticide Action Network and look at some things. They also have a way you can start a garden, or you can use a plot that you already have with your garden. They have a honeybee haven pledge, where you basically pledge to create a place in your garden for honeybee haven with pesticide-free food, shelter, and water. And you can even go on, sign a petition on Greenpeace or on the rainforest site. They really want the EPA to just outlaw these pesticides, and so we can kind of, you know, start rebuilding our earth. Thank you for joining us this week. I hope you enjoyed the show.